At Old Leckie, we're really lucky that we have a lot of old features, a lot of features from a designed landscape, big parkland trees, hedges, coppice woodland, wetlands. So we're trying to maintain what we have and also enhance and improve it. So we've planted new hedges like this one. We've added some species-rich grassland. We're trying to create more diversity in our wetland areas, little wader scrapes, and maybe trying to adjust the vegetation height. But we're really trying to create diversity in habitats and structure across the farm and make it fit with the farming business.
Well, Fergus and I have just walked across this field. We nearly got blown away with the wind, but as you can see, we're here and we're nice and sheltered. So there's the shelter value for wildlife, and it's a great habitat for wildlife, and it's also shelter value for your livestock as well. The diversity of plants in here means it's a great habitat, and just as well as the hedge, if you have a wider boundary habitat, as Fergus has just talked about, diversity of structure there, because you've got the trees in as well as the hedge, and then you've got the margin along the hedge as well. So it's a habitat for a whole range of species, nesting opportunities for birds, hibernation for insects and small mammals, and there's feed value in the hedge, from the blossom for the pollinators to the berries in the winter for the birds.
Yeah, and for me, it's sort of, from a management perspective, it's great having a shelter in the winter, but it also creates smaller field parcels. And so for me, I have 1 hectare blocks with electric fence zone system over there where everything's on a 2-day shift. And then in situations like this, probably things are in, sheep are in for maybe a week, and heavy enough stocked, and then I can rest them. But if I hadn't subdivided this field with a hedge, then I have more work to do with electric fencing and that type of thing.
Yeah, when you're looking at locations of hedges, probably the main thing is stay away from big, open, wet, kind of rushy fields that you know you've got wading birds in. And the wading birds are really vulnerable just now. And the wading birds are the peaweep, the curlew, the oyster catcher, the snipe and the red shank. And their numbers have really crashed, and they need a kind of wetland, big open field, because they don't want hedges or trees too close by, because predators can sit and pick them off and pick off their chicks from there. So, and also think so that's where you wouldn't want your hedges, but think about here where you're tying up, maybe there's a woodland behind, there's a hedge along here, and you're tying that hedge to the next habitat further up, and another hedge over the hill there. So it's kind of tying up habitat. Some people call them wildlife corridors, so you can look at it like that. So that's where you would choose it.
Practically, it's across the prevailing wind, so that's useful for me. And also, it's not cutting across field drains, so you wouldn't want the roots going into field drains at a later stage, so you've got to think about that too. This field was in, it's a 40 hectare sort of area, and we've subdivided it into 3, and so we chose the hedge locations where there had been previous hedges, so we cut the old stumps back and got regrowth and then planted alongside. The older hedge, which was done around the time of the Countryside Premium Scheme about 25 years ago, we were too mean with our ground and we fenced it too narrowly, and which means the hedge is starting to become slightly lollipopped. So it's grazed in low and sort of bushy on top, whereas this one we've given a 3-metre corridor for it to grow in, so we can grow quite a thick, wide hedge. We didn't use plastic tubes, we just used netting, which we'll remove as it gets a bit bigger. But we want a good shelter type of hedge. The hedge is made up predominantly of hawthorn and blackthorn, the main 2 sort of species there. They're your typical thorny species. But then amongst it there's guelder rose, there's dog rose, there's bird cherry, and there's interspersed with some oak trees here and there. They're providing a diversity but also lots of berries for the winter.
All the ones that Fergus has talked about, the blackthorn, the hawthorn, the guelder rose, the bird cherry, they all play a role because they've all come out at different times of year. The blackthorn flowers really early, although we've seen 1 or 2 tiny flowers, and it's got berries as well. Then the hawthorn comes out, and then the bird cherries and the guelder rose, and also there's dog rose as well that you can put in, and hazel. So every plant has a slightly different flower and a slightly different berry. So it's that mixture that's really, really important. Fergus was talking about being a bit mean with his the width of his boundary for the first hedge he had, and it means just really what he's been saying is it's hard to get in and manage, because in the first few years you might need to weed, or if you are using, I know Fergus has used the netting here, but if you're using guards, it's hard to get in and manage or take them away once the hedge has grown away and you don't need them anymore. Well, first of all, if you start thinking about your ground preparation, so you want to have, it depends if you're in an arable situation, you'll probably be able to plough the area, and then you've got a bare ground to start off with. In a grassland situation, you may spray off a strip, or you might just, I've seen some farmers just put a big roll of a straw bale as a mulch. It's just to keep the grass weeds down to start off with. So you want it really short, or spray that area off, depending, you might be organic so you can't obviously spray it off. So that's the ground prep. Then you're planting, in this case, this was an agri-environment scheme, so you're planting 6 plants a metre in a double staggered row. If you're not getting funding under an agri-environment scheme, you could plant 4 plants a metre, because you're still going to get quite a good mix. So choice of species, we've talked about a nice diverse mix of species, that's what you want. You plant it at the same time as you would plant trees or a woodland. You plant it any time there's an hour in the month, from September to April. But you're probably better to plant it in the winter time, because in April sometimes we get really dry Aprils, and that could dry out your hedge. And I think, Fergus, you had to
this
water.
one we planted it over in I think in January, February time, but then later in April it got very dry, April, May, so we actually had to water the whole hedge, which was a real struggle. And then it took, and it was fine, and then certainly the first couple of years, you maybe need to go through and hand weed it all for grass, just to make sure it's not swamped, which can be, takes a bit of effort, but it's definitely worth doing it, otherwise you lose a lot of plants, I think.
And that's for sure, because to actually manage it, weeding is crucial. Whatever way you do it, whether you do it with chemicals, maybe curb granules sometimes for grass weeds, but hand weeding it, the effort that you make, because you've spent a lot of money on putting this hedge in, you want to manage it. And you also have to protect it, and we've talked about, Fergus has got the mesh here, but it depends if you've got deer, or deer wouldn't really jump into a narrow 2 fences, so you've got to protect it against livestock and deer and hare, rabbit and vole, so you can get the spiral guards, the plastic guards. We're now trying to go away from using plastics if we can, but so far we've got tree tubes that are cardboard. But the spiral guards, the good thing is you can take them off once you don't need them, and you can reuse them in a different site. So as long as you reuse them and recycle them at the end, I think that's fair enough. So that's really the manage, and you've got to think you've got to maintain it. But what you're wanting is, what we've really got here is the berries. So you would obviously, the main aim for a hedge, the easiest way to say it, is berries in the winter, so you need blossom in the spring. So normally if you cut it, and maybe just not just look at your individual hedge, look right across your whole farm and see the different hedges that you've got, and have a sort of hedge management plan. Because the roadside hedges need to be cut every year for safety, but maybe an internal hedge, the berries on hawthorn and blackthorn and quite a lot of other species only come on in the second year wood. So if you want a good berry crop, you might want to leave one hedge or trim it very, very lightly one year in order to get a good crop of berries. And in another hedge, you trim the other edge. So you might do it every year, just a very light trim, or you might do it in different hedges, a different trimming system. And also, you might let 1 or 2 hedges go into free growth, where there's not an issue between 2 fields. So just let them grow into almost like hawthorn trees. And that might be an old hedge that you allow that to happen. So trimming it is the main thing, but having a pattern right across your whole farm.
We hadn't done anything to it until last year, and sort of year 3 we just gave it a light cut along the top, but we wanted to maintain quite a high hedge, 5-6 feet, and sort of broad. That's the plan for this hedge. For our farming operation here, hedges are fantastic in that we have shelter in the fields. We are subdividing our fields to make them easier to manage from a rotational grazing point of view. And we're providing these habitat corridors that link up various habitats across the farm.
Yeah, well, as Fergus said, all these benefits, and benefits in a whole range of different species, a great habitat. But also you might just think about your hedge, think about your whole boundary habitat, because as well as a hedge, you might have a grass margin next to your hedge, you might leave the margin right next to the hedge ungrazed, then you might have a grazed margin, you might put in a bit of diversity, you could put in a bit of clover or something. So, and also the hedge might be next to a burn or a pond or something like that. So the actual boundary habitat is really valuable, and the more diverse, I think we talked about diversity of vegetation and diversity of structure. If your hedge is part of that boundary habitat, that you've got great diversity, then that makes it even more valuable.